think most of us know what autism is, but it's now becoming a very common neurodevelopmental disability, with 1 in every 68 children affected by this in the United States. And the main impairments are related to social communication and interaction. Some of the specific social interaction impairments that we'll be focusing on with the social robots relate to their limited ability to use both eye contact as well as follow another person's eye gaze, the ability to understand joint attention and do that themselves, theory of mind and response to social stimuli such as calling a child's name, as well as the ability to recognize emotions. So that's going to be one of the main goals of this project, is to improve some of these specific social skills in children with autism, and also children who have developmental disability or intellectual disability as well. So what has been done in the past, we had traditional sort of behavioral-based therapies such as applied behavioral analysis and various social skills training, and they've been found to teach a lot of these positive social interactions to children. Now, one of the limitations of that is that it costs a lot of money, it's very intensive for both the children and the therapists. And then along with the growing prevalence of ASD, shows that there's a need for other improvements or other technologies as well that could be used to teach social skills. Some of these interventions have focused on technology. I'm going to talk about 2 previous studies that we had done looking at technology and how it can be used to teach social skills for children with ASD. And why might they be effective? Or for one, they offer something that is very much predictable. Children know what to expect every time they come in, whereas if you have a human-based interaction, humans are not so much predictable, right? We change, and we might display various social behaviors one day and different ones the next day, whereas these computer-based interventions and robot-based interventions can be programmed so they're very much predictable. They also seem to be comfortable and enjoyable to children with ASD. I'll show you results of a pilot study where kids really are reporting that they enjoy interacting with this robot that has been developed. So I'll start with kind of the first one, avatars, that we looked at, and then I'll finish it off with where we are today with the robot SAM. So in terms of avatars, Dr. Amthor and Yassine and myself developed, along with a computer programmer, a computer-based intervention called FaceA. FaceA was used to teach some of these specific social skills. It was a set of computer games that were used to teach things like joint attention, face recognition, emotion recognition, and even eye gaze. And in that first study, we looked to see, can these computer-based games be used to teach specific social skills? And in that study, we had kids with autism, and this was back in the DSM-IV. We also had children with Asperger's syndrome. Today, we probably would turn those sort of ASD or maybe even high-functioning, low-functioning children with autism. We had about 50 children, or 49 children total. The diagnosis, again, was based on the DSM-IV criteria. And the kids in that study range from 6 to 15. And you'll see that the study we're proposing now, we're limiting the range a little bit to 12 years of age. For this first study, we recruited children from various local schools, as well as Mitchell's Place and New Glenwood. There are 2 facilities here in the Birmingham area that serves children and adults and adolescents with ASD. And we are proposing to use similar recruitment sites for the current study. So for the first study with FaceA, we had a computer-based intervention. Here's one of the games that we used. And in this first game, the avatar in the middle is attending to one of the numbers around her face. And she's asking the child to point or touch to the number that she is attending to force them to sort of pay attention to her eyes. And along the way, teach them that eyes provide us something important. And it starts out easier with just the numbers 12, 3, 6, and 9, and then it becomes more challenging as the games move along. For this previous study, we then also had a control group, and they were randomized into either face-to-face intervention or control intervention, where they also played a computer-based game that had nothing to do with social skills, so it's just about pain. So what did we find with that first study? We did find that that emotion recognition did improve for both the children with autism as well as the children with Asperger's. So compared to the control, the training group did improve in their ability to recognize emotions. We also found that in terms of facial recognition, for the children who were somewhat high functioning with Asperger's group, they also improved in their ability to recognize faces, not for the low functioning group. And these low functioning group had much lower IQs than we are probably going to see in the proposed study. Their IQ score on average were 52.
What's your standard error on those?
Not include that in this.
Well, then you remember to help you.
Yeah, I'm trying to think. The Benson.
Later.
Again?
We talk about later.
Okay, all right. So we are going to use the Benson on the proposed study, which is one of the measures we'll be using.
And how long was the training? How long was the period of playing the game and then testing?
Yeah, so it was 8 weeks intervention.
That is it.
And this was all right after, though, right?
Right. 1 to 2 weeks after.
Did you do anything as far as sustained?
We have not. No, we have not looked at follow-up.
What's the setting for this intervention done?
So it was done at the schools where the children attended. So we went to the schools and provided intervention to them.
And it was supervised, but no human involved in this, right? This is not.
Well, there was a human involved. So
Yeah.
The experimenter was involved and sat with the children. And especially for the low-functioning children, we had to reward them for attending. So they had sticker charts. We even had some edible reinforcers that we provided them to make sure they attended for 20 minutes up to 30 minutes per session. Questions? All right. Now, interestingly, is that social skills, in terms of what parents reported, also improved. Parents didn't know if the children were in the control group or if they were in the intervention group. We told them after the study that the children who received the training, the parents saw that they saw improvement in social skills in the home setting. Similarly, we went to the playground and measured children's social skills on the playground, how likely they were to approach others for play, how much time is spent in solitary play, and so on.
Is this blinded assessment?
Right, it was, right. So these ratings were conducted by students who were not aware of what group the children were in.
Yeah.
And we are planning to use a similar playground observation, not the same one. We wanted a little bit more detail in the proposed studies. We're using the code for the proposed study, but again, it's going to be blinded raters. All right, so now this leads to kind of where we are today with social robots. So social robots are also predictable. They also seem to be engaging for children and adults. And they're reporting that sort of children are displaying even increased engagement and attention when we use robots. And I'll show you the results of the most recent study we've done with this. Robots have been used to teach children and adults various skills. Things like imitation, emotion recognition, and joint attention. But in terms of the face is a very important component in all of this. The face is important if you are to learn about both social skills, emotion recognition, and things like that. Whereas in the past, a lot of robots have not utilized the face to such a great extent. We are proposing to do that. And you'll see kind of where we're incorporating human-like features in the robot as well. Now, we want the robots to be approachable. And some studies have shown that these animal-like robots are much more approachable for children. They find them to be less anxious provoking than the human-like robots. But we also want the robots to be able to display these human expressions. I'll show you kind of how we bridge that gap in a second. So from the most current study, we found that, yes, this robot is interesting for children. It is something that they enjoy, they want to have more time engaging with, and it is able to display these facial expressions. Oops. So this is Sam, or socially animated machine. He is a humanoid robotic monkey, about 50 centimeters tall. He is able to interact with users by various motor movements. He claps his hands, he can point to things, he can shake, he can nod his head and shake his head, as well as using vocal recordings. So he talks back and forth to the children as well. Sam displays the 6 basic emotions. He displays happiness, sadness, anger, fear, surprise, and disgust, by alternating both his eyebrows, the tilt of those, the mouth, as well as the display board for his eyes.
Has studies control kids what they see when they look at these?
Yeah, good question. Yes, we have. So we have used 35 typically developing children to ask them to identify and label the emotions that he is displaying. And we found, I think it's actually on the next slide. Well, it's coming up. It's about 90%, over 90% accuracy. All right, so in that first, I call it sort of pilot study, the first study of using Sam, we wanted to see exactly what you're asking. Is he able to display and form those human expressions? And also, is this something that kids enjoy interacting with? Is something that they want to engage with? So with that, we had 35 typically developing children, as well as 13 children with autism for this first part of the study. And the result that I'll be presenting in this section was mainly done by Sarah Cook, who just defended her master's thesis looking at this. Here we go. So it's 83% accuracy in terms of their ability to label Sam's emotions. So it does seem to be able to do that accurately, especially comparing it to the previous robots. We also saw that the children who have an ASD seem to be engaging when it comes to robots. We compared the robot interaction to a live human interaction, and they spent more time looking at the robot's face than they did looking at a live experimenter's face. So it used to draw their attention. And the children who engaged with Sam also reported feeling happy, comfortable, and wanting to have more interactions with him. All right, questions about sort of where we've been, where we are now?
Maybe you covered this, going back to Sam, what you're going to develop that. It would seem that if you would give it more video eyes, it's fairly flat face. I just wonder if that would help, because kids are often looking at the eyes, and the eyes really not doing it.
The eyes are moving.
They're opening and
Back
closing.
up a couple of, so it's just a different. If you look, you can see there's differences in the eyes here.
Yeah.
Well, and also kids with autism tend to focus less on the eyes than the other facial features. There's a whole group of literature about facial gain.
Yeah, well, that's what I'm talking about.
That's why
Actually,
you're trying to
I don't know, in a previous study we found that wasn't exactly true. It had more to do with the duration of the looks. We haven't actually seen it.
But like in the later one.
Yeah, because it gets more information. In fact, that's typical for most first one. If you look at the mouth, actually in most cases gives you more information. And in fact, where the kids had the most difficulty was like with was it surprise and
Surprise and fear.
so
they're distinguishing between these two is a difference.
So they had difficulty. What they were doing is they were matching these. The kids were actually matching these to pictures of line drawings of expressions and pictures from Ekman Reeson's original studies across global population.
Yeah, I think I would suggest, maybe, talk to some people over in engineering and see what they could do to make it more realistic, if that helped.
Yeah, actually, Sam's probably the most realistic of the robots that are out there right now. Most of them, it's just kind of a plastic head and it doesn't really have any expressions. There's a new one that just came out called Pepper, but it recognizes your expression. You're right.
Panic and those guys are doing some amazing things. Down the road, I mean, not getting wrong with this, but you may want to. They're very willing to collaborate.
So my question is, what's the relationship between the computer program and the STEM? Is it parallel that you're really developing two separate endeavors, different tools, or is this something of an improvement upon the computer program? Why is the first one having a setup for this current proposal?
Right. So Sam is teaching similar activities, or he's engaging in similar activities to what Say used to do in the computer program. We feel like Sam is going to be even more engaging and potentially improve even further, especially for those kids that we saw with Say did not improve as much, the low-functioning children. We feel like Sam, with the simplicity of some of these activities, that they're able to pick up on that more so than computer games.
It's sort of moving in the direction that you're talking about. So we take a flat screen, although it's an avatar, and talk to you, and we make it more animated and an actual character. And one of the things that Maria didn't talk about was there was the little animals in the corner, they say, and the animals actually gave the instructions on what to do. And because kids with ASD seem to pay more attention to animal figures, and actually like monkeys or something.
And I guess you would assume this would increase generalizability or just generalization, because one of the things we see clinically is people do great in the therapy room, but then when you go to a real social situation, you don't see generalization of those skills. So
I know that one of the main goals of the current proposed study is to look to see, can these skills be generalized? Go to the playground, what about teachers' report and parents' report for social skills? And not just how do they do on these emotion recognition tasks or facial recognition tasks.
It's also kind of moving with the current intervention area in technology. For a while, the avatars were the thing, and now robots, or not even necessarily even autonomous, they use robots to teach autistic learning disabilities how to do math. They sit next to the kid and they encourage the kid to help. So there's a whole host of things. The problem for us was this sort of, goes back to your question about making it a little better. Most of those robots cost about $60,000. Why they don't do all the things that you don't see. So this is part of the reason.
The work our greenhouse boy did good things for you. But
It is based on our new
yeah.
Yeah.
But so, maybe I just confused my brother. Does the monkey Sam give feedback to the kid from what the kid does?
Right. Yeah. So he has voice program controls or recording, voice recording, whether they get it correct or correct. There are different types of recordings. Yes, that's right. Good job, Johnny.
Yeah. Interestingly, I actually watched the post-test with 3 of the kids who all had a diagnosis of autism, and they didn't look autistic while they were listening. So it was interesting.
Yeah.
So, could you go back to the picture of the whole puppet, because it's not clear to me. So these are mechanical parts. The only video screen are the eyes. The rest are mechanical parts, right? The eyebrows and the mouth. Right?
And he does move his head, his arms move, and his legs move. Right, so what are we planning to do? Well, we're planning first to see, can he be effective to use with children who have both ASD as well as instructional disability? So can he be effective with those low functioning kids? And then in terms of that, can we see in terms of these specific social skills, do they improve following this intervention? We also want to see if they improve in facial recognition, the Benton that we use for face aid. We want to see if the kids improve in terms of their adaptive behavior skills. And then finally, we're going to see if participant characteristics might be predictive of how well they do with SAM. So I'll come back to these specific aims and hypotheses related to that. We're proposing to use 50 children who have both ASD as well as intellectual disability, again, ages 5 to 12. We're going to recruit through those similar mechanisms, again, through Glenwood as well as local schools. We don't anticipate recruiting from Mitchell's Place. We've recruited before, mainly because we want to have those low-functioning kids, and there's not enough of them at Mitchell's Place. Potentially a few, but mainly through Glenwood. Before they get into the study, we want to make sure that we verify their diagnosis using the ADOS. We're also going to give them a language skills inventory, the Peabody, as well as an IQ test, the KBIT. And then we'll match them on IQ and language skills, and then randomize them into either the same intervention or a waitlist control. So what is the intervention? It's going to be a 6-week-long intervention, so 6 separate sessions with SAM, and then a pre and a post measure. With SAM, they will attempt to SAM between 20 and 30 minutes. I have to see how these kids with intellectual disability do with that, but in terms of face aid, they were able to maintain attention for that amount of time with some reinforcers. We'll do this after their classrooms. We'll go into the school setting, potentially after school programs or during school hours. And what Sam is going to be teaching them are things like asking the children to match his emotional expressions to a picture or a drawing that they will see on the tablet. He will give various social stories or scenarios, and then asking the children what emotion might he be feeling based on that story or scenario that he gave them. And he will either model those expressions initially, and then later he will not show those facial expressions. So the tasks become more difficult with time. All right, in terms of the measures, pre and post, we're going to look at social responsiveness scale, and for both parents and teacher, to see are these skills generalizable to the home and school setting. We will also go into the playground and measure their social engagement on the playground. We'll have parents and teachers use the Vineland to look at their adaptive behaviors. We use the facial recognition test, a Benton, and then finally an emotion questionnaire, identifying emotions. So the first aim we had was to see, can SAM be used, right? Can it be effective for this group of children who have both ASD as well as intellectual disability? So we hypothesized that social skills are going to improve as evidenced by the social responsiveness scale, parent and teacher report, as well as the playground observations. They're going to show less solitary play, for instance, following the intervention. The second aim was to look to see is it effective in improving facial recognition. Again, in those kids who receive intervention, we'll see it. We hypothesize that we'll see an increase in Benton facial recognition test. And we're also going to use emotion identification as well as reaction time to Sam's questions to the kids, and they'll respond using the tablet as pre and post. The third aim was to see about their adaptive behavior skills following the intervention. And here we're really not sure how it's going to go. We hypothesized that adaptive behavior will improve, as indicated by the Vineland. Now, there really hasn't been any studies looking at this, so we're not entirely sure how this is going to play out. But we hypothesized that sort of the whole Vineland overall school will improve, and mainly that's going to come from the socialization and communication domains. But we also hypothesized that based on their improvement in social skills at home or in the school setting, that they'll also show less that maladaptive behavior on the Vineland. And we don't predict any differences in daily living skills or motor skills, basically because the intervention is so short. We don't expect to see sort of long-term effects on those two domains. And then the fourth aim, where we're looking to see are there certain participant characteristics that we might could use to see who is going to be, who is SAM going to be effective for. Kind of going back to what we found with phase data, we found that it was more effective for a certain group of kids, or certain participant characteristics that we might identify. So again, we hypothesized that initial receptive language skills are going to be predictive of greater social skills improvement. Greater ASD severity will also predict greater improvement. We think that they are going to be able to do even better with SAM based on their initial scores. And then we also predict there's going to be some differences when it comes to ethnic and racial minorities based on their previous social skills interventions that they might have received and might not have received. So we predict that non-white participants will receive greater benefit from the treatment compared to white participants by the SRS and the POPE, and then similar effects for Hispanic, Latino, and non-Hispanic Latino. All right, so to summarize all this, we feel like this robot-based intervention may be a cost-effective and engaging method for teaching children who have both ASD and intellectual disability. And we aim to kind of look at the generalizability of those effects. Is this something that they will be able to also show improvement in a home and school setting following this intervention?
Do you guys have any plans for looking at the persistence of the effect?
We have not for this proposed study, but definitely that's something we have talked about even with space. It would be really nice to kind of look at follow-up. We do have a graduate student exactly who is looking at those 13 children that got the pilot study of this, and then hoping to follow them into this fall semester. So that would be about 6 to 8 months after they got this brief intervention to see if there are long-term effects of the intervention.
The kids in the Avatar phase A study are not available for a follow-up to see how that persisted.
Those children, we could, but that had now been several years ago. Those children received that intervention. We do have the pilot data from SAM, right? And that is, there's a graduate student who's talking about doing that coming fall semester.
In the Avatar kids, they flipped over to get the treatment when you go into the SAM kids. So the first kids get the treatment, second kids are controlled, but they get the treatment.
Right, exactly.
So that's what happened with the Avatar, I assume, too. So
They're switch over.
Right, so we, with the Avatar children, we provided, if they wanted to, we gave them an opportunity to receive the treatment. It wasn't supervised by us, but the parents could provide that treatment for them, so gave them the CEO.
So what's the definition of intellectual disability? What's the definition?
So we're going to be recruiting children who have an IQ of less than 70.
And what's the prevalence of that among children with ASD?
That's a high number. I mean, it's very high.
Yeah, it's 40 to 50%. It's probably decreasing in the last 10 years based on
dirty kids.
Well, no, early intervention, one of the strongest impacts is on cognitive skills. So the more kids are treated early, the fewer kids we're seeing with intellectual disabilities.
Yeah,
as they
we're
get
also
older.
diagnosing more and more kids who didn't get diagnosed in the past with those.
Right, and then so the overall prevalence has decreased.
Dirty, that we're now saying. So that's the number of kids with higher functioning ASD is
And actually, lower kids running just their communication skills helps them do better in the IQ.
right.
But you did say you're not using kids in the 50s like your previous studies, so what is your range?
We don't anticipate
Okay.
that the children will have sort of a 50 range. Yeah, we anticipate we might have some who are going to be in the 50s, but then all the way up to 70.
Are you measuring their cognitive skills or taking reports of cognitive data?
The reason that I was asking that is because you mentioned in the proposal that there's a level of difficulty in recruiting children with ASD and ID. And then in your design, you mentioned that you want to match everything with randomized. So I guess when you think about, you're literally, depending on your matching criteria, what range would you use to match? Would you match someone with exact ID and exact whatever like language skills? And then how easy and how difficult is that to reach your recruitment goal? I think that's a question I have. And then the other one I have is how easy it is to maintain blinding. It's different from your computer study where you assign a program regardless. So the kids are going through something. Now you have two groups of kids. I mean, one is apparently hanging out with monkeys and the other is apparently not. So it's very easy for the teachers to see who is getting it and who's not. And how are you going to be able to maintain blinding is another thing to consider. And I was also looking at your analysis, so you're using 2 by 2 factorial ANOVA, and I don't see, I mean, number one, why are you looking at baseline if you match everything at baseline anyway? If you're just looking at the change, you'll be, the amount of change, it would be a T-score or a non-parametric test. So I don't understand the use of 2 by 2 ANOVA tests. It doesn't seem to warrant that in any way, I guess.
All right, so a couple of things.
Yeah.
One is kind of what range we'll be looking at for matching criteria. And that's definitely a good point. And based on the previous study at Glenwood, right, so most of those children were within 50 to 60 IQ. We're hoping to also then go up to as high as 70 IQ. We'll kind of have to see where that plays out and where these children will be coming from.
What you're really concerned is that the randomization doesn't take care of the variabilities, right?
Will you consider like a floor level for developmental age? So not you're looking at a chronological age and an IQ, but I mean, is there a point at which you say that this 5-year-old has an IQ of 50?
Right, will they really be able to complete the intervention? That's going to be the main issue.
They probably language.
Well, I mean, it's like healthy 2-year-old.
So that was one of the reasons why we decided to do the PBT as a pretest measure, because that's just a measure of language. The scenarios are 2 to 3 sentences. They're pretty simple, but we wanted to at least make sure that they had a receptive language score, able to understand the robust scenarios at the most difficult level that they would encounter in the intervention before they were included in the
So
study.
that means possibly the exclusion of Hispanic kids. Or if their home language is Hispanic, I think Spanish-based. Especially if they're young, because you did talk about socioeconomic diversity, and if it's solely in English, that would definitely implicate the study population possibly not having a lot of Spanish-speaking home environment.
Or it's the likelihood of them agreeing to participate is fairly weak because they're more close population.
Yeah, I'm just raising questions. I'm not trying to make it anyway. I think that as we discussed, I felt like this sense of lack of clarity perhaps in the eligibility criteria. What you want to specify, what is low IQ, what is diagnosis, age group, and how much variability you're actually expecting to see within. As the question was raised, is there a floor for different measures? I think these are what's the implication of that?
Yeah, all great comments. I think for us, with SAM being somewhat new to us, and we've only really used it for one previous study, it's hard to kind of determine who is going to be able to respond to the activities that he's asking of them. So although we have determined that children have to have at least below 70 IQ, how far will we go? Right? Will we go to 50 or 52, like the different studies say? We have to kind of minimize that range somewhat. And I think we need to kind of talk about that further and maybe do a few extra pilot studies with children who have both intellectual disabilities and autism spectrum disorder.
Do you have a video cameras? Or are you videoing the kids' eye movements and so forth?
We did with the first study, right? We used an eye tracker to look to see where the children were attending to, what parts of SAM were they looking at, compared to the live human interaction.
We used this live tracking. We could tell what actually were. And one of the findings was they actually spent a lot more time looking at SAM space than experimental space doing similar kind of tasks.
And here, I just make that more obvious, and maybe I missed that, that's part of your analysis as
Well,
well.
with this proposed study, we weren't planning on using eye tracker. One of the reasons why is because of this particular population having both intellectual disability and autism spectrum disorder. It would be hard to calibrate those children.
To have a facial expression and so forth. That you
No, they just have to sit still for a short period of time, so
You can definitely record the children as they are responding
you
to
need a
the
blind reviewer to do it.
because we did both. We used FaceLab, but then we also recorded all the kids' computer.
The other thing I like is where, I thought the whole thing was nice. A few things I think we got with it. The thing that you have in there about the kids drawing the faces they're seeing. You're doing that right? You mentioned that.
They match it to drawings,
Yeah.
so it's sort of previously drawn pictures of emotions. They're matching the same
It's
face.
like a smile that gives them.
And they're just picking out.
They're matching that, the drawing of emotion.
Okay, it sounds like they're actually drawing. These kids probably too disabled to draw.
Yeah. Especially kind of the more complex emotions like disgust, surprise, and fear. So yeah, they're matching same space or same stories with those drawings as well as photographs of emotions or labels of things.
So, going back to the statistics, why not using the pretest as a coping?
I'm trying to think what we said. Why not the pretest as a covariate?
Because that's what we
Using a
do.
COVA, right, where it's matching. I feel like we talked about that we weren't exactly sure of where these children will be coming from. We wanted to limit as much variability as possible between the groups and kind of matching them on IQ and TDT.
But if you're doing a repeated measure, there's one possible way to do it, which eliminates the 202, is to use the pretest as a coping.
Yeah, actually, I comment that from a slightly different point of view, which is you showed some graphs where you separated Asperger's from the rest of ASD, I guess. But why not you have the IQ scores of all the kids in your study, plot a scatter plot of training effect versus IQ score, and see what trends were in there. The interesting thing, and it would be a motivation for this study, say, look at this end of the graph, the effects are more or less or whatever. So you have that data.
Yeah.
Another question is why the SRS and not the SSRS?
We talked about that. I think we just thought that the SRS was a better measure of social skills for autism, but I think that's one of the things that we should discuss as well.
The
My
SRS
concern about the
is more-
SRS is we've done some studies with it as a screener of ASD.
It's not as,
Issues with it.
it's not as great for diagnostic specificity, but it is used in treatment outcome to look at, it's pretty sensitive to change in the skills. It's a broader measure of autism-specific social impairments versus general population social impairment. I mean, you could get both, it's not that. It's not that. The SSRS is just older and already
Yeah, there's a.
main utilized.
That's-
But your basic study was one of the only social skills studies I've seen that had seen really nice SSRS findings. And autism, like it's just not as sensitive to change.
Well, related to that, the line,
Yeah.
the line was such a general nature, I'm not sure we're going to see the change. I participated with Ellen Percy in the red study where they're using the line, and they dropped it after a year because it was such a general measure. I mean, I think it was a study looking at some drug that was being used with this red. They found no changes in how you use the big line changes, and I said that when we were first viewing this with the drug company.
We got raw scores. I think you have to look at raw scores.
Either it didn't change over the course of the short course of the study. It did change, so they basically dropped the line because it's really a very general measure. It doesn't have specific kinds of things that we see change, especially that short period.
What were you hoping to capture with that? Just general adaptive behavior and possibly and some cognitive? Like what?
Kind of another way of looking at generalizability in school when it comes to social and communication. So we can use the SRSS as well as the SRS. But what about adaptive behaviors? Kind of thoughts about other measures the guideline might not show.
When you could look at, if you're interested in problem behaviors, I mean, there's several, like a lot of people use the average behavior checklist or like the developmental behavior checklist, but that's not going to look at general adaptive skills, but it will look at reduction of aggression and.
Well, they're the vast actually has. So I mean, that's another possibility. Because that would also give you some measure of their potential.
Right.
I'd like to address both your questions and then get to grasp what's your question. It's related to that. When I look at your aims, I get lost and I review a broad explanation and stuff. It's too many. I don't know where your focus is. You've got to tell them up front, here's what I really want to find. Related to that, when I see you only have 50 subjects, you do 5 to 12, they're over a fairly broad range of ID, and then you're telling me you're going to look at ethnic differences. On top of that, you lose me a little bit. So again, it's telling the reviewer, here is what I'm really interested in, this differentiation. I've got the power to do that. Correct. What you might think about doing in that relationship is putting together a logic model. You could just put a fairly small table there. You could address what instruments are going to use, why using that instrument then, and what's that going to tell you. If you do that nice table and put your aims there, I think it might help you be a little more focused. Because I just don't see with 50 you're going to have the power to differentiate well.
Are you going to collect data on those weightlifting kids? You are going to collect data on them. Okay. I mean, it's part of this to get the 50.
Yes.
But I mean, after the intervention. So is it a true waitlist control where they're going to go through the intervention and you're going to get data on them so you can determine the time?
For this study, they were just going to use control. But again, for another study, they could then receive the same intervention and not
So you can have 50 total or 50?
50 total, so 25
So
receive
25, 25, which is going to make it even harder to make some of the differentiations you talk about here.
Good idea to do a table and because we, as we're tooling around with it, well, we want to look at this, we want to look at this, and it's bigger and bigger. But you're definitely right. We're going to have enough participants to look at everything. Can we narrow our focus down to determine what's going to be the most important?
If you got the time, it'd be really be nice to be able to look at those crossovers, 3 months out or whatever, and then you'd have 50 to deal with. You could do longitudinal control for those. And you follow the same subjects, European measures design, that's going to give you much more power as well.
So I have this, it could be not really applicable, but what makes you hypothesize that it would be, so the data that the innovation part, you stated that because the effectiveness of the SEM has only been tested in ASD children, but not with intellectual disability. Is there any data, such as data stratified by IQ or anything that suggests, is there any reason they would function differently in the intellectual disability children versus just the general ASD population? And then I agree with the Branson part because your intro kind of throws me off. You talk about the difficulty of having these patients, racial ethnic diversity, low-income family, and it was not at all relevant to what you're trying to do. It seems like it's just not very targeted in that. And about multiple outcomes, you may be thinking about doing some sort of statistical testing. If you want to do multiple tests you can control, you can basically modify the p-values and what would be considered significant. But you also can argue based on, well, I'm just doing an exploratory analysis that was just really to see. These are all my comments, and I have another meeting coming up fast, so I hope so.
Thank you so much. In terms of why do you think these kids are going to...
Well, in relation to that, one of the things you might talk about is the study that we did where we compared Fragile X kids with kids with ASD because they were mostly ID kids that didn't have ASD. And what the different results were in terms of their ability to identify facial expressions and how different it was. But the other side of that is kids with ID that have no autism, they have great difficulty with social interactions too. They don't always get it. And the reason that they, as adults, have difficulty with jobs is because they don't know how to interact with people. They're not usually, and the schools don't teach them.
I mean, IQ is very social economically based, right? Like lots of stuff. When you talk about intellectual disability, it's very SES based. Like I'm completely out of the.
Not necessarily.
Well, so maybe it will be advantageous to really base your study on the lack of understanding or available effective interventions for the kids with intellectual disability versus bringing all the other factors into the discussion when you start that.
Yeah, I think based on the comments, kind of focus more, especially within the introduction, why this study and why this population, instead of trying to talk about the possibility of the effects.
And how much bang for the buck you get out of this versus the avatar? Because you got similar data, right? You're going to use the same test. This is a little more expensive than the avatar, for sure.
Another, I don't know if it's more than anything, but another rationale is a lot of the kids in this IQ range that we're talking about in many states, maybe not so much in Alabama, are now being called ASD, when before they were called IQ, and they're getting kind of shifted over into autism for whatever reason. And in fact, some of them are actually kind of getting called ID, or getting called specific learning disability because of the way they're interpreting their IQs, particularly when their IQs are around 70. So, And again, I don't know how that would work into what you're talking about, the overall.
Yeah, I had that question about just your sample and using the ADOS alone to determine, to verify diagnosis. Because I see a lot of kids in clinic use ADOS scores that have autism that don't actually have autism.
Right.
And so,
Whose IQ is 70, 75.
or whose IQs are average, if they're
Yeah.
really anxious. And they don't have autism, and so their ADOS scores are poor.
I mean, ideally, they would have been diagnosed
Have a
by,
clinical
like,
diagnosis.
yeah, before, in order to be confirmed.
You can confirm the ADOS. I mean, that would
If
be.
we are recruiting from, they will have to have a diagnosis in order to be at either Glenwood or receiving special education in the school system.
But not necessarily clinical diagnosis, because the State Department has people doing ADOS in the schools and qualifying for autism that is purely score driven, not clinically driven.
There's a lot of clinical pressure to diagnose kids with special education.
Yes, there is. And so
And the teachers are doing that. If a kid doesn't qualify under any of the categories, and in fact, she and I had a dispute over a kid, and I backed off just because if he didn't get an ASD diagnosis, he wasn't going to get special ed, and he really needed special ed. And she may have been right.
well, I think, even if it was something like your team is a clinically based, a part, in clinical assessment of autism, even if you filled out a rating of like your certainty of the diagnosis or something, because I'm on several studies where we're not only doing the ADOS and the ADI, looking at diagnostics, but we're just doing a clinical certainty score of these are what my measures said, and this is how comfortable I feel with saying that's what it is. Even though you're not doing a clinical assessment, I think that's the trend. It's not just, particularly if you're just using the ADOS and not getting a parent report yet, and making it look more like the clinical diagnosis. If you have clinical records and you can confirm it, that'd be great, but there will be kids from the schools potentially who have never had a clinical, because they're probably sitting on our wait list. I mean, truly.
Is there a less intense parent report that you like the ADI that doesn't take like how long it takes? Okay, all right.
There's some screener questionnaires that like the SRS is supposed to be in like Fresno. We looked at that in our developmental population. Everybody looks like it's not specific in a high risk population. It's very sensitive.
I mean, because it wouldn't be good to have people who've been in autism.
Right. And you can't just determine that. You can look at their profile. You could say if their SRS score isn't in the autism range, then you're not going to use them because like, you've got a parent and teacher report. The odds are it will be in that range, but not just the ADOS alone.
And the other thing that I think she made a good point about control versus experimental approval. Now people won't know who's doing it.
Yeah.
We had a simple with Sarah Ledger's dissertation. We had some of the problems as well. There was no way we could control it. We didn't have to control it because the intervention was Kate Collins' dissertation.
But you do have the playground observation,
That's
which is blinded. So that's at least one piece that's blinded.
Yeah, sure. Some kids will be talking about the robot with a parent, but they will all receive a pre-measure with their robots. They will all have some experience with the robot, so maybe we should make sure that we kind of tell the parents that they'll be engaging with the robot, so even if it's in control, the parents can kind of be expecting that they have gotten some exposure to the robot, so they might not know when they're in control or intervention.
There are other robots that you can get from Amazon. When we were first designing this, we looked at those other little robots that you get for $150. They just plug it in.
Yeah, that would actually be that way they'd be taking out of the classroom. Yeah, especially because then that would make, if we see treatment effects in the same intervention, that would be even more evidence that it was actually because of salmon, because they got something instead of nothing.
The other alternative for control would be to have Sam not interact with the judge or the kid before you have to sit there, just move, irrespective of what the kid's doing. So you'd have the same dosage, but you wouldn't have a direct interaction.
Like just watching him do something.
Yeah, whatever you wanted to do, Nice thing about that, you still get the same contact, but then you can look, the kid that had that minor contact, did they get better when they had training? Did they move faster? You know, once they might not be able to.
Yeah, I mean, the best control, I agree, is to have them interact with sound, but the monkey just doing random things, not tied to any special pattern of activity. Same kind of length of exposure, same rules of engagement, but sound just doing random things.
Do you guys think that that would influence the waitlist getting the therapy afterwards and being able to combine the groups and saying whether or not the treatment was effective? Because the first group wouldn't have played with Sam without getting an interaction for 6 weeks prior to receiving the intervention. I know that was a little bit roundabout way of saying it, but
Well, yeah, that's what it affects.
like they're just familiar autism.
Their trajectory might be better because it's more familiar, but is that right?
Well, only in the sense of being able to data, yeah.
It's just profound, I mean.
Time is very.
The other differentiation I don't remember you talking about, but it really seems like you should be looking at age differences. Maybe you talk about an explicit. I would imagine that exposing a 5-year-old is going to be a very different experience than a 12-year-old. And how rapidly they pick it up just in terms of acculturation over time is going to be quite different.
That range of age may have been to potential range of IQ scores. So if we have an IQ of 50, a 12-year-old with an IQ of 50 might be pulling in somebody who's younger with a high IQ. We could definitely kind of do this category and talk about it too in terms of looking
Right. You could split it out
age.
later. But because that becomes very informative as far as what are you suggesting for treatment? Are you suggesting you have to intervene early or doesn't make any difference in 12-year-olds functions?
We did look at like the same things, so like the older kids did not respond as well to late stage. Probably didn't enjoy it as much. I would expect something similar with same.
Neuroplasticity, that makes sense. They're more progressed during that trial.
I mean, I don't want to throw a monkey wrench, but the whole concept of minority is tied into socioeconomical conditions. So if the kids come with a much better household interaction, parents' education, access to care, really it's not about ethnics or racial or race. It's more about quality of life, right? Certainly for the African Americans who are going to speak English as good as the white kids. Now, so that I'm a little bit unclear or uncertain what is the basis to call it ethnic or race if it's not a biological basis of race and ethnicities. It's mostly based on socioeconomic status, access to care, education, interaction at home, early intervention, motivation with the parents, and all that. So that's on the white and African Americans because they speak the same language. Now, with the Latinos, the point was raised in that perhaps there will be a language barrier with interacting with the monkey. But having kids at home that are born here that speak or understand Spanish from us, I would say that the kids probably are going to have the advantage of having been exposed to 2 languages rather than the handicap of not understanding the monkey. So if you address in this pilot, which I agree with Mike, that it may be way too much to take at first. But if you address the Latino or Hispanic-speaking population, I would suggest thinking about the possibility that perhaps it's not a handicap that the kids cannot engage with the Mati, but perhaps they have an advantage for having their brains working in two languages.
Yeah, that's definitely the case with average or above average intelligence kids
Mm.
who understand we're bilingual, and mostly they're kids who support that.
Mhm.
The problem with the kids who have ID, are Hispanic or Latino, is that they're often being missed. We've had an undiagnosed a couple of kids in the school system as bilinguals because they got confused with bilingual. Their score on the ADOS. So that's going to be a potential problem. I mean, either way, it's an issue.
Well, and the other side to that is also, this is just anecdotally, clinically, a lot of the kids that I see where Spanish is the primary language in the home, those children have language delays in both languages and tend to be stronger in English because of exposure to our intervention in their schooling.
And they could have later.
Well, a lot of them never acquire the Spanish because there is a language disorder component of autism, and so I see a lot of families, I mean, relative to what I see, but I've lately seen a bunch of preteens and teenagers who have autism, whose families are Spanish speaking, the child is primarily English speaking.
I see.
Usually, by the time they get to a fifth, sixth grade.
Yeah, so that's where they're immersed outside of the home, and so it was the younger children, when I'm diagnosing and I ask which language do you feel like they're better in, it's usually they require English. So I don't know how that'll, I don't know what rate they're going to get. We're looking out for sure.
Time's up,
So
but we
that's what you
can
were
keep
saying,
talking if you want to.
Yeah, it is easier to interpret the minority English-speaking population because they don't have the language issue that the Hispanic. But I would same as Frank was saying, scatter plot the IQ. I would consider rather than calling it ethnic or race, doing a scatter plot of socioeconomic status in terms of their healthcare quality, their parents' education, which is probably a predictor of engagement of the kids early on. Scatter plot the data on something that is more hardcore handle than race or ethnicity or white
If there's no access to healthcare, it might not be all that for this group. It's probably as good as mine, so it may not be a big socioeconomic issue.
or rural versus
Well,
urban.
the socioeconomic is it because of, because of, the amount of time that the parents, because of their background and their education, spend encouraging their kids to stay in school, attending parent teacher meetings.
Or pursuing diagnosis and intervention in the first place.
Or early diagnostic.
We were definitely thinking of more sort of socioeconomic differences. We call it race / ethnicity. The ethnicity will kind of get as an if we're all going to include it in the proposal, then we work about the relationship and terminology. You're right, kind of just look at the trends.
Okay, again, you want to make that a soft outcome, your hard outcome has to be different. And maybe if you have an age, you got nothing to split out. Think about it.
And then also going to want to know what you're going to do next. They want this to not be a pilot program at the end. They want to see if you're going to take us into an RO1 and have agreements and how this is going to, what are your next steps. So make sure that you, excuse me, include your next steps in what you're going to do. Okay, I've got this pilot data, and this data is going to lead into what? Okay.
I gotta go. Yeah, think about all the mechanisms, so, R1's what they want, but
Right.
21 STTR,
21, whatever, gated, whatever.
or an STTR, if you want to develop this commercially.
Exactly. But they want, they do want to see that it's much go above and beyond.
Yes, yeah. I mean, you'd rather see.
It's all return on investment. It's all about the money.
I mean, if it is cutting edge and it's not too spread out, the idea of using robots, the foundations, I've had the experience that are the places where they will take the bigger risks. I know the Red Foundations have a couple of grants with eye tracking tablets, which are very expensive for the kids to engage in conversations with their parents. And the tablets are extremely expensive, and Red Foundation is picking up the tab to study, IDA. So Simon's Foundation or those might be the place to go for pilot funding. I mean, if this is becoming mainstream, if there's like 50 places in the States using robots, then the wow factor. But if you guys are on the leading edge, I would definitely go for foundation as a first step before thinking bigger engagement.
Except if you linked up with some of the computer guys down the street, you might be able to spin this as a nice intercept, small proposal. If you're not going to go even further, it's going to be more innovative.
So the interesting thing about these studies is when Marie and I first started working on them, they said we submitted the grant to Autism Speaks. And we also submitted for UAV. Yeah. We got turned down for that, and then Autism Speaks, they said this is undoable. Well, it's now published in the Journal of Disabilities, and not only that, it's listed, because of that, it's listed on the Autism Speaks website.
Yeah.
So, I mean, people just,
I just talked to Professor Day, he got triage for the sprint from NIH, DOD is their top grant. Exact same grant. Well, when you're dealing with 5 or 10% acceptance, and this could be good. Focus a little more in your aim. Try to make the aims really easy for the reviewer, because when I'm writing my review, I like to flip back to the main board, like one line. I can flip back and I see that they did this, this. This is really good. On yours, it's a little too much text and I kind of get lost. And don't repeat yourself so much either. Do that a little bit away from that. You already told me something. So again, I think put together a good logic model or a good table. You take care of a lot of that already. And you can see you already did it there. So. 25% my grant. So.
No, it was really good.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Come to science fair this year. Because there's some kids, especially if you're out there, and those kids are all into robots. Last year they won 3rd place at automated computing support.
robots are things. There was a robot that came out a week or so ago called Pepper. And Pepper does what we do with the face lab. It actually analyzes the face and interprets how you're feeling, and then talks to you about your feelings. So they're looking at using it for people who have mental health disorders and things like that to help them to be more mindful. It's part of their therapy.
I love feedback. I was really into some of Vanderbilt therapy, but it's not for the lower performance, it's for higher performance. But it's just keep playing so forth, so they've got a lot of feedback. They marvelously there, but they learned a lot.
Well, they're using the robots and stuff. Kids who have learning disabilities do that. So the robot sits there and encourages them, and they ask the robot a question, and it's like, here, it answers the question, and helps them figure out how to solve the problem. And then they love it because the robot isn't threatening to them, it's not intimidating, so they're not asking their older sibling,
Or a teacher.
I'm concerned.
One of the repairs that I did, I didn't know it was Boy Scout. I didn't for that. I said, it's just something. One of the Boy Scouts, like at Hollywood, it's well, they're part of the body, it's right.
Right, yeah, yeah.
They're all, yeah. It's not the same. Several of them can do teaching you rock and everything.
Yeah. We have to do a lot of customer
I just
service.
think you need to find teams to actually talk. Does everybody else have any
Training is,
So what are other people measuring social skills?
anyway, field's moving fast.
A lot of
Our windows are getting cheaper and cheaper.
Like, you have to see what's other things.
in addition to so and you know,
Yeah.
really the assumptions.
Zero.
They're spending less time teaching.
Yeah.
Maybe they don't teach you because that was their way of trying to interpret your emotions.
Anyway, let me know if I can help at all.
Which we didn't even go into.
Yeah. I think it's cool. I think in the autism realm, it's a very strong study. I don't know autism speak for one thing, but
Yeah, I was just, the other thing that we talked about is, I agree, the applicant in the 50s is probably. So,
What
I've
brings us in that range?
Oh,
tried to get them 65 to 75 for all possible.